Yeah, yeah. The Memoirs of Casanova, Chapter 16. As soon as Balby was sufficiently far away, I stood up and went over to a shepherd who was guarding his little flock on a hill a short distance away. "What's the name of this village?" I asked. "Valdepidiene, signor." I was surprised. I had gone further than I thought. I asked him the names of the owners of 5 or 6 houses I could see from where I stood, and it happened that they all belonged to people with whom I was acquainted. But under the circumstances, I could not risk making trouble for them by going to see them. Next, I asked him who owned the red house I could see off in the distance. He replied that it belonged to a captain who was in command of the polizia in that area. I was extremely surprised, but after bidding the good shepherd farewell, I began to walk down the hill, and I still cannot imagine what instinct made me go toward the very house which reason as well as fear ought to have made me avoid. I went to it in a straight line, and I can say truthfully that I was not consciously acting under my own will. If it is true that we have a guardian angel, I must attribute to mine the irresistible impulse which led me to the house of the man whose presence I ought to have dreaded above all others, because, be that as it may, it was the boldest move I have ever made in my life. I entered without hesitation. In the courtyard, I saw a young child spinning a top. I went over to him and asked him where his father was. Instead of answering, the child went off to call his mother. A moment later, a very pretty pregnant woman appeared and asked me politely why I wanted to see her husband, and I apologized for his absence. "I'm sorry the father of my future godchild isn't here," I said, "but I'm happy to have the chance to meet his beautiful wife." "Your future godchild? Then I must be speaking to Signor Venturi. My husband told me you'd promised to be the godfather of the child we are expecting. I'm delighted to make your acquaintance, and my husband will be terribly sorry he wasn't home when you came. I hope he'll be back soon because I wanted to ask him to let me spend the night here. I'm ashamed to go anywhere in this condition. You'll have the best bed in the house and a good supper. My husband will come to see you and thank you for the honor of your visit as soon as he returns. He left only an hour ago with all his men, and I don't expect him back for 3 or 4 days." "Why will he be away so long?" "Have not you heard that 2 prisoners escaped from the Leads? One is a patrician and the other is a commoner named Casanova. My husband received a letter. He received a letter from Messer Grand ordering him to make a search for them, If he finds them, he'll take them to Venice. Otherwise, he'll come back here, but he'll continue to search for at least 3 days. But, but why, why are your knees bandaged?
I was hunting in the mountains and fell from my horse. I was cut rather badly, and the loss of blood has made me weak.
Oh, poor man. But my mother will cure you. She called her mother, told her everything I needed, and left. Her turn of mind was certainly not in keeping with her husband's profession, for nothing could have sounded more like a fairy tale than the story I had told her, on horseback in white silk stockings, hunting in a taffeta suit, without a cloak and unaccompanied by a servant. Her husband must have ridiculed her when he returned, but may God reward her for her kind heart and benign ignorance. After examining my knees and hips, her mother told me affectionately that I would have to make up my mind to suffer a little, but that my wounds would be healed the next day if I would leave wet towels on them and lie still in bed. I promised to be patient and do as she said. After eating a good supper, I went to sleep while she was dressing my wounds. It is probable that she undressed me like a child because I remembered nothing when I woke up. It was 6 o'clock when I ate supper, and I woke up at 6 o'clock the next morning. I quickly took off the towels and was astonished to find that my wounds were dry and completely painless. I combed my hair and dressed myself in less than 6 minutes. I went down the stairs, crossed the courtyard, and left the house without appearing to pay any attention to the two men who were standing in front of it and who must have been polizia. As I swiftly walked away from that house in which I found such benevolent hospitality, I could not help feeling horror-stricken when I thought of the imminent danger I had escaped. I shuddered involuntarily, and today, after so many years, I still shudder at the thought of the peril to which I shall rashly expose myself. I was dumbfounded at having been able to enter that house, and still more so at having been able to leave it. It seemed impossible that I should not be followed. I walked through woods and over mountains without meeting anyone except the few peasants, and without ever turning my head. At sundown, exhausted and dying of hunger, I stopped at a solitary house. I asked to speak to the owner. The concierge replied that he was not there. He had gone to a wedding on the other side of the river and would be gone for 2 days. But before leaving, he had ordered that hospitality be extended to all his friends during his absence. Providence, chance, anything you like. I entered the house and was given a good supper and a good bed. From the address on several letters, I saw that I was in the house of Signora Menci, the consul of I forget which nation. I wrote him a letter, sealed it, and left it for him. After a good night's sleep, I got up, dressed myself carefully, and left, without being able to give the concierge a token of my gratitude. After walking for 5 hours, I had dinner in a Capuchin monastery and then went on until 3 o'clock, when I stopped at a house owned by a friend of mine, as I learned from a peasant. I entered, asked if the master was at home, and was shown into a room in which he was engaged in writing. I stepped forward to embrace him, but when he saw me, he made a gesture of fear and told me to go away without delay, giving me frivolous and insulting reasons. And I explained my situation and my need and asked him to give me 60 sequins in exchange for my note, which would guarantee him that Signor Bragadino would repay him. He replied that he could not help me, not even to the extent of offering me a glass of water, because he was afraid of incurring the displeasure of the tribunal. He was a man of 60, a bill broker, who was under great obligation to me, whether from blind fury or righteous indignation. I seized him by the collar, showed him my pike, and loudly threatened his life. Trembling in every limb, he took a key from his pocket, pointed to a writing desk, told me there was money in it, and invited me to take as much as I wanted. I told him to unlock it himself. He obeyed. When he had opened a drawer in which there was gold, I ordered him to count me out 6 seconds. You asked for 60, he said.
Yes, when I expected you to lend it to me as a friend. But now that I must owe the money only to force, I want only 6 sequins. You'll be repaid in Venice, when I'm going to write a letter telling what you forced me to do. You are a coward, and you do not deserve to live. Forgive me, I beg you. Take everything. No, nothing more. I'm going now. And I advise you to leave me alone, or in my despair I may come back and set fire to your house.
I left his house and walked until nightfall. Fatigue finally forced me to stop at the house of a farmer, where I ate a bad supper and slept on straw. The next morning I bought myself an old coat and rented a donkey to ride. And near Theltra I bought a pair of boots. It was in this outfit that I passed through the village known as La Scala. The guards there did not even do me the honor of asking me my name, for which I was grateful, as the reader can well imagine. I rented a cart with 2 horses and went on to Borgo de Valsugano, where I found Balby in the inn I had indicated to him. He told me he had arrived there without difficulty and that his accommodations were good. He paid me the compliment of assuring me that he had not been expecting me because he had not been believed, or he had not believed my promise to meet him. Perhaps I would have done well not to keep my word. I spent the next day in bed writing over 20 letters, including 10 or 12 circulars reporting what I had been obliged to do in order to procure the 6 sequins. The monk wrote impertinent letters to his abbot and his fellow patricians, and lascivious ones to the servant girls who had been the cause of his downfall. I took the trimming off my suit and sold my hat, thus ridding myself of a luxury that was unsuitable in my situation because it attracted too much attention. The following day I went to Pordine, from there to Trente, and then to Bolzano, where I presented myself to an old banker named Mensch. He gave me a trustworthy messenger whom I sent to Venice with a letter for Signor Bragadino. The old banker placed me in a good inn where I stayed in bed during the 6 days the messenger took to return. He brought me 100 sequins from Signor Bragadino. The first thing I did was to buy new clothes for Balby and myself. Every day the wretched Balby gave me some new reason to find his company intolerable. He was com- he was constantly repeating that if it had not been for him, I would never have escaped, and that therefore, in accordance with my promise, I owed him half of my eventual fortune. He lusted after girls, all the servant girls, and since he had neither the face nor the figure to please them, his advances were received by vigorous slaps, which he took with exemplary patience, but without mending his ways, for more than 24 hours at a time. This amused me, but I suffered from having to be involved with such a vile creature. We took a stagecoach and arrived in Munich 3 days later. There I met Countess Coronini, whom I had known in Venice, and who was in good standing at court. This illustrious lady, then 70 years old, told me she would try to persuade the elector to give me asylum. The next day she told me that His Highness had nothing against me that would prevent his allowing me to stay in his territory, but that Balby would not be safe in Bavaria, since, as a fugitive monk, he might be claimed by the monks of his order in Munich, and His Highness did not wish to have any trouble with them. Balby would therefore have to leave the city and seek refuge elsewhere. Feeling obligated to look after the poor monk, I went to see the elector's confessor to ask him if he would give me a letter of recommendation for Balby addressed to someone in Swabia, Swabia. His only reply was to tell me that I was well known in Munich. I asked him coldly if he meant to give me that information as bad news. He did not answer, and our interview ended there. Another priest told me he had gone off to verify a miracle which people were talking about all over Munich.
What kind of a miracle?
I asked. The Empress, widow of Charles VII, is dead, and her body is lying in state, but her feet are still warm. You can see the wonder for yourself. It is not every day that one can see a miracle, and to neglect this opportunity would have been to lose a chance either to enlighten myself or to laugh. I was no less eager for one than the other, wishing to be able to boast of having seen a miracle, and of a kind that was all the more interesting to me because I have always had the misfortune to have cold feet. I hurried to see the body of the august Empress. True enough, her feet were warm, but I saw that the explanation was quite simple. Her late Majesty's feet were turned toward a hot stove a short distance away. Michel Agata, a dancer who knew me and whose curiosity had drawn him there, along with the rest of the crowd, came up to me and complimented me on my successful escape. He told me everyone in Munich was speaking of it with interest. I was glad to hear this because it's always good to interest the public. He invited me to dinner, and I accepted with pleasure. His wife was the beautiful Gardella, whom I had known 16 years earlier. She was now a celebrated dancer. She was glad to see me again and hear the story of my laborious escape from my own hips, my own lips. She was glad to see me again and hear the story of my laborious escape from my own lips. She took an interest in Balby and ordered me. She took an interest in Balby and offered me a letter of recommendation to Canon Bassi, a friend of hers in Augsburg. She wrote the letter on the spot, assuring me that I would no longer have to worry about Balby because she was sure Bassi would take care of him and even make it possible for him to return to Venice. Delighted to get rid of him in such an honorable way, I hurried back to the inn and gave him the letter, promising not to abandon him in case Bassi should not receive him well. I found a good carriage for him and saw him off the next day at dawn. 4 days later, he wrote me that Bassi had given him a perfect reception, lodging him in his own house and introduced him to the Prince Bishop of Arnstadt. Now that I was alone and tranquil, I gave serious attention to recovering my health. Everything I had been through had given me a contraction of the nerves which threatened to take an alarming turn. I went on a diet, and within 3 weeks I felt perfectly well again. Meanwhile, Madame Vere, whom I had known in Dresden, arrived in Munich with her son and 2 daughters. She was on her way to Paris for her eldest daughter's wedding. I considered myself fortunate when she told me they would enjoy having my company during their journey. She firmly refused to allow me to pay part of the expenses. Since I was already planning to go and live in Paris, this stroke of good luck made me foresee that happiness was awaiting me in the career of adventure which I intended to take up in the city, in the only city in the world where the blind goddess of fortune dispenses her favors to those who abandon themselves to her and know how to profit from her. I was not mistaken, as the reader will soon see. But the favors of fortune proved useless to me because my capricious behavior eventually destroyed all my advantages. 15 months in the Leads had acquainted me with all the maladies of my mind, but it would have taken an even longer stay there to imbue me with principles capable of curing them. We arrived in Paris on Wednesday, January 5, 1757. After renting an apartment for myself, I went to the Hotel de Bourbon with the intention of seeing Monsignor de Barnis, who had become Minister of Foreign Affairs. When I arrived, I was told that he was in Versailles. In Paris, more than anywhere else, one must act quickly and, in the words of the proverb, strike while the iron is hot. Impatient to see how I would be received by the obliging lover of my beautiful Maria Magdalena, I took a cabriolet and reached Versailles at 6:30. But it turned out that our carriages had crossed on the road. Monsignor de Barnis had returned to Paris with the Neapolitan ambassador. I got back into my carriage. When I reached the gate, I saw a crowd of people running wildly in all directions and shouting, "The king is dead. The king has been assassinated." My driver, frightened, wanted to go on his way, but the carriage was stopped, and I was ordered to leave it. I was taken into the guard room where I saw some other people already waiting. Within 3 minutes, there were over 20 people there, all astonished to find themselves under arrest, and all as guilty as I. I did not know what to think. We looked at each other gloomily, not daring to speak. We did not remain in this situation for long. 5 minutes later, an officer came in, politely apologized to us, and told us we were free.
The king is wounded.
He told us,
And has been taken to his apartment.
the assassin has been arrested. I climbed back into my carriage, and I was glad to be there. The return to Paris took about 3 hours. In that short length of time, I was passed by at least 200 couriers riding at full speed. I saw a new one every minute, and each one shouted out the news he was bearing. The first one said what I already knew, and then I learned that the king had been bled, that the wound was not serious, and then finally that His Majesty could even go to the Trianon if he so desired. In those days, the people of Paris imagined that they loved their king. Today, more enlightened, they will love only a sovereign who is truly concerned with the happiness of the nation and who is only the first citizen of a great people. Now that I was once again in Paris, I regarded it as my home, since I had to give up all thought of returning to the home which the accident of birth had given me. My native city is ungrateful, but I still love it in spite of everything, whether because of the prejudice which attaches us to the place where we spend our first years, or because Venice actually does have charms unequaled by those of any other city. Paris was not at all unknown to me. The reader will remember that I had already spent 2 years there. During my first stay, having no goal except that of killing time, I had been concerned only with the pursuit of pleasure. Fortune, which I had not bothered to court, had not opened her sanctuary to me. But I now felt that I must treat her with more respect. I needed to approach those on whom she had showered her blessings. I needed to approach those on whom she had showered her blessings. I was not worried about my immediate needs because I could count on a small monthly allowance from the Signor Bragadino. If the reader remembers my relations with the French ambassador in Venice, he or she will find it natural that my first idea was to address myself to him. Convinced that the porter would tell me Monsignor de Bernis was occupied, I wrote a letter to him in advance and took it with me to the Palais de Bourbon the next day. The porter took my letter and I gave him my address. Meanwhile, everywhere I went, I had to tell the story of my escape from the Leads. This task became almost as tiring as my actual escape had been. But my situation required me to be obliging to all those who were curious about my exploit. because I had to assume that they were all moved by an affectionate interest in me. In general, the surest way to please is to assume benevolence in those with whom one becomes involved. I was impatient to learn what reply Monsignor de Bernis would make to my letter. He did not keep me waiting. I received a note from him asking me to meet him at 2 o'clock the following afternoon. You may be sure that I was punctual. He expressed his pleasure at seeing me victorious and told me he was glad to be in a position to help me. Maria Magdalena had written him about my escape. He showed me her letter. All the details were either distorted or completely imaginary. She was excusable. She was excusable. She was excusable because she was able to write only what she had heard, and it was not easy to learn the true story of my escape. The charming nun also wrote that, having lost all hope of seeing either of the only two men who made life worth living for her, existence had become a burden to her, and she regretted that she could not have recourse to piety. Katerina often comes to see me, she wrote, but alas, she's not very happy with her new husband. Some time later, Monsignor de Bernis sent for me to tell me he had spoken of me to Signor Rizzo, the Venetian ambassador, who had told him that he had nothing against me, but that, not wishing to have any trouble with the state inquisitors, he would not receive me. I did not mind because I had no need of him.
You can present yourself to Monsignor Vallon, the Comptroller General,
Said Monsignor de Bernis.
with a little ingenuity. You can turn his acquaintance to good advantage. Try to invent something useful to the royal income, but avoid anything complicated or impractical.
I left him satisfied and grateful, but puzzled as to how to find some way of increasing the king's income. I knew nothing about finances, and however much I tortured my imagination, all my ideas amounted to nothing except new taxes, which were either odious or absurd. I rejected them all after twisting them in every possible direction. Monsignor de Boulogne, Boulogne, Monsignor de Boulogne received me politely and complimented me on the high regard Signor de Bernis had for me and my knowledge of financial matters. I received, rather, I realized that no compliment had ever been more gratuitous, and I almost burst out laughing, but my guardian angel made me keep a straight face.
Describe your ideas to me, either in person or in writing,
He said,
You will always find me eager. You will always find me eager
to consider them.
Meanwhile, allow me to introduce Monsignor Paris Dubar, who needs 20 million francs for his military academy. That sum must be found without burdening the state and without emptying the royal treasury.
Only God has the power to create, I remarked.
I am not a god.
Said Monsignor Paris Dubarne.
Although I've sometimes created, but everything is different now.
I'm aware of the difficulties, I said, but I have in mind an operation that would give the king the interest on 100 million francs.
How much would it cost?
Nothing but the expense of collection.
Then it would be the people who would supply the money.
Yes, but voluntarily.
I know what you have in mind.
That would surprise me, Monsignor, because I have not spoken of my idea to anyone.
If you have no other engagement, do me the honor of coming to dinner at my house tomorrow, and I'll show you your project. The idea is good, but I think there are certain insurmountable difficulties. However, we'll discuss and see what comes of it. Will you come?
I will be honored. When I left Monsignor de Bologne's house, I went for a walk in the Tuileries to reflect on the strange stroke of luck that I had just befallen. I went for a walk in the Tuileries to reflect on the strange stroke of luck that had just befallen me. I had been told that 20 million francs were needed. I had boasted of being able to provide 100 million without having the slightest idea of how to do so. And a celebrated financier had invited me to dinner to convince me that he was already acquainted with my plan. There was something amusingly bizarre about all of this, but it fitted in rather well with my way of acting and feeling.
If he tries to find out what my plan is, I said to myself, I can simply refuse to tell him. And then, when he tells me about his own plan, I can decide whether to say he's guessed mine or that he's mistaken. That he's mistaken according to what my inspiration of the moment tells me is best. If his plan seems to be within my understanding, I may be able to say something new about it. But if it's beyond me, I'll fall into a mysterious silence, which sometimes makes a good impression. In any case, I won't reject Lady Luck if she wants to favor me.
When I entered Monsignor Paris Dubar's house the next day, I found him before a large fire, surrounded by 7 or 8 other people, to whom he introduced me as a friend of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Comptroller General. 4 of the gentlemen were financial administrators. I listened to their conversation in boredom because it was so packed with technical terms that I was never able to follow it very well. Finally, just as I was beginning to yawn, dinner was announced, and I spent an hour and a half without opening my mouth, except to do justice to an excellent dinner. A few moments after dessert had been served, Monsignor Paris Dubar invited me to go into an adjoining room with him, leaving the other guests at table. We walked through a room in which he found a man of pleasant appearance, about 50 years old, who followed us into another room where Monsignor Paris Dubar introduced him to me under the name of Calthebiji. A moment later, 2 financial administrators entered, and Monsignor Paris Dubar handed me a large notebook and said,
Monsignor Casanova, here
is your plan. I took the notebook and read on the cover,
lottery, whose prices, drawn once a month, can fall only on 5 numbers.
I handed it back to him and said with great self-assurance,
Yes, I admit it's the same. You have been forestalled. This is Monsignor Calthabige's plan. I'm delighted not to have been forestalled, but to see that I share
Monsignor Calthabige's way of thinking.
May I ask why you have not adopted the plan? A number of very good cogent objections have been brought against it, and only vague replies have been made to them. I can think of only one possible objection. The king might not want his subjects to gamble. He might not want his subjects to gamble. He'll allow them to gamble as much as they like, but will they do it?
I'm surprised that anyone could have doubted. I'm surprised that anyone could doubt it, provided everyone is sure the winners will be paid. The people must believe that the king is prepared to pay out 100 million francs.
100 million? Yes. The people must be dazzled. Yes. After at least 150 million francs have been collected, there will be no problem then. But you must admit that the king might lose an exorbitant amount on the very first drawing. I admit it, but there's an infinity between the possibility and the reality. I will demonstrate to you, before all the mathematicians in Europe, that it is impossible for the king not to win 1 franc out of every 5 that comes into the lottery. Would you be kind enough to speak before the council and explain your ideas to them? With pleasure. Will you reply to all objections? I believe I can promise you that. Will you let me see your plan? I won't show it to anyone until the decision has been made to adopt it, and I have been assured of a reasonable compensation. But your plan must be the same as Monsignor Calthabige's. I doubt it. This is the first time I have ever seen Monsignor Calthabige, and it's unlikely, if not impossible, that our plan should be identical on every point. Besides, in my plan, I calculate approximately how much the king will win every year. I'm willing to demonstrate it to the council, provided they won't hesitate to act after I have shown them the certainty of the results.
I felt capable of keeping my word, and this inward feeling of confidence delighted me. I took leave of the assembled company, satisfied to have read in their faces that I had given them all a favorable idea of my abilities. 3 days later, I received a note from Monsignor Paris Dubar asking me to go to École Militaire the next day at 11 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, Calthabige came to give me a large sheet of paper containing a mathematical table of the entire lottery and asked me to show it to the council. This table came to me like a blessing from heaven. But I pretended to receive it only as a matter of form. The conference opened as soon as I reached the École Militaire. After my demonstration, which lasted no more than half an hour, the members spent an hour making objections which I easily refuted. Finally, Monsignor Paris Dubar stood up and said that, in any case, the lottery could always be closed. When I heard these words, I was sure that I had won my case. The members all withdrew after signing the minutes of the Munich. They all withdrew after signing the minutes of the meeting. A moment later, I bowed to Monsignor Paris Dubar and left. The next day, Calzadigi came to bring me the good news that the plan had been adopted. I was given 6 ticket offices plus a salary of 4,000 francs. Calzadigi was appointed as general administrator of the lottery. His rewards were much greater than mine, but I was not at all jealous because I was fully aware of how much right he had to them. I immediately sold 5 of my offices for 2,000 francs each, opened the 6th on the Rue Saint Denis, and made my valet its head clerk. He was a very intelligent young Italian who had formerly been the valet of the Neapolitan ambassador. My first receipts amounted to 40,000 francs. An hour after the drawing, my head clerk brought me the records and showed me that we had 17 or 18,000 francs to pay. I gave him the necessary funds. The receipts of the entire lottery amounted to 2 million francs, of which 600,000 went to the administration. It was a rather handsome profit for the first time. It was easy to foresee that the receipts would be at least twice as large for the next drawing. Now that the reader knows enough about the success of my lottery, I will speak of it only when it has an important bearing on the events of my life.